Hi, good evening everybody. Welcome, a warm welcome to our Food and Drinks Supply Chain webinar. My name is Foran. I am the Supply Chain Development Manager for Cumbria Chamber of Commerce. Now, as we all know, food and drink remains the biggest spending category in the UK, and I'm really proud that Cumbria is home to some of the best food and drinks producers in the country, and indeed, I dare say, in the world. So whether your business is a small business or a large business in this sector, I'm sure you agree with me that we've all witnessed a trend in rising standards in the county. From what you can see on supermarket shelves to smaller outlets, we see an increase in the number of really good food, quality food, artisan producers and suppliers, which is really, really great news for us. It is one of the sector that we can all play a part as a business owner or as a consumer. Again, very much thinking outside the box. This sector also creates a really great range of opportunities for service providers, not just people directly involved with producing food or suppliers of food. We're talking about companies that are involved in logistics. We're talking about the hospitality and the tourism sectors, accountants, photographers, marketeers, right down to those who provide the packaging for the food and drinks sector. So the opportunity there is huge. At the Growth Hub, we offer a range of business support. We can connect you with industry supply chain. We can help you understand what large organizations expect from suppliers. And more importantly, we can help you through your supply chain process and help you land those really lucrative contracts and help your business grow. What we do here at the Growth Hub is very much about helping businesses like yours to grow your business and work with more businesses. What kind of support can we give you? Well, we can give you a range of support from one-to-one practical advice. We have a team of specialist business advisors here that we could assign to you. We can run a range of workshops to suit your needs, as well as offer you access to subsidies to help you, whether it's towards marketing or consultancy or towards other aspects of your business growth. So all I can say is please give us a call, take advantage of what we can offer you, take advantage of the help we can give you. My details are on the screen, get in touch, and we'll see what we can do for you. Another thing that we do, we're really good at the Growth Hub, is we work with other organizations as well. We work with different organizations that can link you up with different initiatives that's going on. So it's not just us. We work with other organizations to help you, strengthen your opportunity. This session, there will be a Q&A session at the end, and I would like to encourage you to submit your questions at any time throughout this session, and we'll pick this up at the end. We will also be running a few polls during the session, so please, we welcome your comments and we welcome your feedback and your participation. That would be really good. The information you give us will really help us. I'm really pleased to have Malcolm Laidlaw with me tonight. Malcolm's from ML3 Technical, and Malcolm will be here to share some of the benefits of his extensive experience in the food and drink sector. So over to you, Malcolm.
Thank you. Just a little bit of an introduction to myself. So my name is Malcolm Laidlaw. Originally, I trained as a microbiologist working in food labs, starting testing milk for brucellosis, before moving on to performing heat treatment experiments to determine cooking times, and then on to DNA fingerprinting to track contamination through food factories. We had a well-used phrase in the lab, it's a commercial decision. It's one that I never really fully understood when I worked there. After leaving the lab, I moved to a food factory, becoming a microbiology hygiene manager. Again, looking after another lab in the factory, setting standards for factory hygiene and checking the hygiene of the factory. It was here that I learned I often had to make the commercial decision, and that this could be costly, inconvenient, and not always easy to make. After a brief stint selling chemicals to dairy farmers, I moved to a frozen sausage manufacturer where I started to learn about food certification standards and the technical requirements of retailers and food service suppliers. I then moved to a fresh produce processor, supplying prepared produce into ready meal manufacturers. It was here I became involved with the M&S farm standard, and whilst our growers were very good at growing crops, the paperwork could be described as could be improved. About 7 years ago, I decided to try and help these growers out by creating a simple quality manual that would help them meet the requirements of the various standards they were being audited against. Since then, I have continued to work with growers and fresh produce pack houses and processors, but have also expanded into other areas such as chutney and sauce making and bakeries, amongst others. In all of the work I do, the most important thing to understand is what my customer is wanting to achieve and what their customer expects. The two may not always be the same. Whilst I am technically based, I do have a commercial understanding. I used to have to price up new products for the fresh produce processor, and as I run my own business, I know a little bit about business economics. When I was first asked to present a webinar on business growth, my first thought was, why would anyone want to get involved in the retail public sector food supply chain? This was not me being pessimistic, but from my knowledge, whilst growing is good, it can also have disadvantages. I have split this presentation into 3 parts. First, I'll talk about growth and the benefits. Then I'll highlight some potential disadvantages. Finally, I'll talk a little bit about some specific topics to consider when you start thinking about supplying into the retail public sector. I know it's not the most exciting topic, but I'll try and keep it short so you don't fall asleep. So, where to start? For the purposes of this presentation, I will take it that you are all currently making a food product. You're selling it either online, in your own shop, or via a market stall. You've decided that you love the product so much you want to see your business grow. And looking at the definitions on screen, business growth ultimately means increasing profits. So why grow? There may be many reasons why you and your business want to grow. Some are shown on the slide. Others may be very specific to either your product, your sector, or you as an individual. What's the difference between the retail and the public sector? If you ask most people to name a food retailer, it would be one of the major chains such as Tesco's, Asda, Sainsbury's, Morrison's. But a food retailer can be anyone from the major retailers right the way down to the small independent retailers, farm shops and market stalls. And don't forget the wonders of the internet. Remember, the Food Information for Consumers regulations also cover distance selling via the internet or over a phone. When we talk about retailers, you will often hear about branded and unlabeled products. Whilst the product inside may be exactly the same or based around a similar recipe, a branded product will have your name on and own label will have the retailer's name on. This may not seem like a big deal, but it can have very large implications for your business, particularly if something goes wrong. When you start to think about the public sector, you realise that the opportunities are massive. Just to give you some idea, there are 5.4 million people employed by the government in the UK. There are 414 schools in Cumbria alone. However, as most food sold by the public sector will be from on-site restaurants, canteens, etc., the brand is not always as important. Public sector may be very good for you to sell large volumes, but if you are specifically all about your brand, it may not be the way forwards for you. The map here just shows some detail of the percentage of public sector workers back from 2010. Unfortunately, it's the most recent I could find. But it does show that within Cumbria, we do have a high percentage of public sector workers. Okay. On to the first poll for tonight. Could you have a look at the options there and see who you currently supply? I'll just give you a minute or so to do that. Okay, so it's looking around 75% of you are selling your product through your own shop, market stall, etc. And 25% are via an online retailer. No one's answered that they supply either into the retailers or the public sector. So we have some potential for growth here. So what are the advantages or disadvantages of selling into both of these? Retailers will give your brand exposure, potentially leading to other purchases either from your range or from another outlet. Different retailers do have different requirements. It's important that you understand what you're being asked to get involved in terms of product volume, price, promotions, and any technical requirements before you start supplying. Just to give you an example, I recently did an online specification for a very simple product. It was a carrot. You might not think that that's complicated. However, it took me 3 hours to complete. Yes, the system was new to me, but I knew what the answers should be. The fact that the system didn't have all the function it needed to, and we had to make up some of the results, took a lot of getting my head around. If you're interested, the Chamber of Commerce can help you get involved in the supply chain and help you get involved with different retailers and understand what requirements you need for them. In terms of the public sector may be useful to increase volume if you have surplus capacity or if you're not that interested in branding. But the public sector doesn't always pay the going rate. I know a supplier in Scotland who has lost tenders to supply schools to uncertified companies who can't provide the alleged required financial history because they were too expensive. Cheap may be good, but in the food industry, if it's cheap, there is generally a reason why. Okay, so on to the second poll. What has put you off growing in the past? Okay, so it's looking at around a third of you are unsure of equipment and raw material costs, a third of you put off around increased sales, and a third of you fear of commitment, which I can understand. It may be easy to say we want to grow and to set out our targets, but without proper planning, you could fall flat on your face early on. What about the volume? You've decided you're going to increase your production, but have you thought about the raw materials? Have you considered the availability, both from a seasonality and volume point of view? You may think you can easily up your order, but if a raw material isn't available, then you can't supply the finished product. And bear in mind, some raw materials, particularly if they're fresh or specific varieties, for example, may have a 12-month or more lead time. On a positive side, if you increase your usage, you may be able to use alternative suppliers to get a better price. When you are able to order, then you need to think about space. If you doubled your production, can you cope? What about the space to store the raw materials? Do you have the time to make the extra products? You can always employ more people, but can you afford to do this without confirmed orders? And how long will it take to train somebody up so they're proficient in the job? If you're making for a specific sales period or promotion, can you afford to buy the raw materials, make the product and store it without actually getting any money back for potentially several months? I know of a bakery that supplied a retailer with a Christmas product. They started making the product in September for December sales. Would they do it again? The answer was no. Although it was a good experience for them, it wasn't right for their business, as they had cash flow issues related to them having to purchase the raw materials far in advance of the sales. Unfortunately, being in business ultimately means money and profit. If you make and sell your own product, you can control a lot of the costs. The more steps in the supply chain you add in to sell your products, then the less profit you will make, or the higher your product will cost to the end consumer. For most products, there's a ceiling price that people will not spend over for that item. The ceiling price will be different depending upon your route to market and in different retailers. It's also common knowledge that some retailers will use supplier-funded promotions. Can you afford to pay to promote your own product? What will you get in return? Bear in mind you can't control the individual shops, so if they run out, don't restock the shelves, and they happen to have a competitor's product available at the same time, is this money well spent? This slide is all about how retail price has changed over the years. We all want value for money. However, is the retail revolution making food too cheap? Do we pay enough for our food? Do we value our food? As a small business, can you make your product profitably and available to the masses? And do you want to? If you can sell your product to a large customer, you may be able to deliver to one depot. It sounds great, but it may not always happen. You may have your current transport arrangements already sorted out, so you may have set routes for different days of the week. Can you change that around easily? Do you use a local haulier or do your customers collect? You may even post your products out. Selling in large volumes to one depot may sound great, but if you can't get an articulated vehicle to your site or you don't have a forklift truck, you may have issues. Again, think about the volume you need to be able to sell in one go to get a competitive transport rate. If all you can do is half fill a pallet, it will be the same price for half a pallet or a full pallet. Depending upon the retailer you are intending to supply to and whether you are going for branded or own label product will determine what certification requirements you need to have. Whilst legally there is no requirement to be certified, from a commercial point of view, a lot of retailers and most public sector agencies require some form of certification. It is a way of them to protect their brand and customers from poor practices by the supplier. As has been seen recently, certification doesn't necessarily mean everything is perfect. Issues will still happen. And as I see all too often when I audit, you can have the best systems and paperwork in place, but if someone wants to have a Muppet day, there's very little you can do about it. This table shows the requirements of the major supermarkets, and it is just for own label products. As you can see, a number of them are going down the unannounced audit route, and some of them have their own audit requirements and standards to adhere to as well. Bear in mind, if you are required to be in the unannounced audit scheme, the size of your business is immaterial. I have turned up to businesses with 10 people to do unannounced audits. This means you need to think and plan carefully about holidays and also about the knowledge of your staff. You will need to ensure you have sufficient staff and knowledge to deal with an audit at any time. And yes, I have turned up when the technical person is on holiday and we still do the audit. Also, if you supply several retailers and each has their own requirements, you will have to adhere to each of those in addition. So, on to the next poll. How many of you are either certified or thinking about going for certification? So, looking at it, we've got all of the people, oh no, just changed. So 50% of the poll says SALSA certified, 50% would like to be within the next 5 years. So that's good. Again, don't forget the Chamber of Commerce may be able to help you get that certification. We all like to think that our products are perfect all the time, but what happens if it isn't right? The graphic shows the percentage incidents in England and Wales from April 16 to March 17. In total, there were 2,265 incidents in this period. A customer complaint may not seem a big issue to you, but if you get a £50 charge for each one, it can soon add up. I work with a bakery who started to supply a national pub chain with an existing product. During the transfer of the product through the new supply chain, a lot of damage occurred to the pots through bad handling. We changed the pot material, we changed the box, we added extra padding in the boxes. They still got charged and ended up with a bill of around £5,000. That is a lot of profit wiped out very easily. If something goes really wrong and your product gets recalled, things get even more expensive. I work with a biscuit supplier who supplies into major retailers in own labelled product. They had 2 recalls within 2 months several years ago due to allergen packaging issues. The first one landed them with a £10,000 charge in addition to replacing and disposing of the product. Luckily for them, they supplied into the one department in the retailer that had the £10,000 fine limit. Had it been through the other department within the same retailer, it would have been £40,000. And for those of you who don't think it can happen, in 2016-17, there were 179 recalls in England, Wales and Northern Ireland and 187 in Scotland. So, if you want to grow, what do you need to consider? For small businesses, there are 3 main types of food safety certification that you'll come across. SALSA, Safe and Local Supplier Approval, is aimed primarily at small businesses. BRC is aimed more at those who supply into the major retailers and particularly if you are supplying own label products. The public sector standard can be used if you want to supply into the public sector without getting SALSA or BRC, but in reality it is a similar level to BRC. Just as an aside, for those of you who supply products containing meat, the requirements of the public sector standard are quite demanding in terms of cross-species contamination. The new SALSA standard does allow you the option to become certified to the public sector standard at the same time as your SALSA audit. You should also be aware of what your customer requirements are. For SALSA, the grading system is either a pass or fail, whilst for BRC you will get a grade, will be either AA, A, B, C or D. However, some retailers require you to be graded at either AA, A or B. They won't accept a C or a D grade from you. So when you're thinking about whether to go for certification, you should look at the benefits from extra sales through new outlets and the potential costs and work involved. You might think it's just about some paperwork, but you'd be surprised the level you may need to go to. For example, if you're a baker selling in your own shop, physical contamination may not have crossed your mind other than replacing damaged equipment. For salsa, you will need to have various audits and checks in place, whilst for BRC, you will need to install a metal detector as well. Depending on which version you go for and whether it's brand new or second hand, you're looking somewhere probably between £5,000 and £20,000. Think about also what condition your building is in. Would you want to bring a retailer auditor around? Imagine your site being on the news. Would you be happy to show it? Many sites find themselves having to upgrade significantly. A potato pack house approached me about 4 years ago. They wanted to go for BRC. In short, they were working out of a barn. We had to put plans in place to build a new pack house that's cost best part of £750,000 to put in place. Obviously, there will be a level of paperwork you do have to do to set systems up, and then there will be a level of ongoing to keep the paperwork up to date. This slide just gives you a rough idea of the costs of an audit, but this is just the cost of the audit. It doesn't include anything else you may need to get in place. It doesn't cover the systems, the procedures, people, equipment, and the building sorted out. This slide just gives you some examples of the top non-conformances for the BRC and for the SALSA standard. For SALSA, about 30% of sites had a non-conformance raised for traceability. Now, given that this is a legal requirement, that's a bit worrying, but perhaps not as worrying as the allergen contamination, which was identified in nearly 24% of sites. Going back to my previous slide on recalls, the FSA's position on allergen contamination is recall first, question later. In addition to the BRC audit that may be either announced or unannounced, the BRC are now doing unannounced compliance audits. This is a check to see the performance of how the auditors are doing, as well as the day-to-day standards on the site. In general, these unannounced compliance audits are showing a reduction of 1 grade compared to the announced audit. So if you got an A grade on your announced audit, the chances are you would get a B grade if you had an unannounced compliance audit. As a producer, you will need raw materials to make your products. While some of you may be in the nice position that you grow or rear your own raw materials, most will have to buy in from somewhere. How do you know who is reputable and can be trusted? What checks are there in the supply chain? If you buy a raw material from a supermarket, that's fine for your own business and can be worked around for SALSA. However, it isn't acceptable to the BRC standard. Also, as a small producer, you will probably find that finding somebody to supply the quantity you want isn't always easy. I work with fairly large bakeries. Some of them use around 3 tons of sugar a week. They still can't buy direct from British Sugar as they are deemed too small. Okay, so next poll. How many of you think you would have issues with supplier approval based on your current suppliers? Okay, so it's looking around 67, so 2/3 of you don't think you would have issues, 1/3 of you are unsure of it. So, linked in with food safety and food fraud, as part of the quality standard, you will need to look at raw material and supplier risk assessments. Depending on who you supply and what scheme you're under will depend on the level of detail required. And don't forget, if you find that you buy high-risk raw materials, what are your control measures? Do you think you can ask your agents who you buy from wholesalers for certificates of analysis? You may remember Horsegate in 2013. Well, food fraud started a long time before then. The Babylonians had a form of food legislation in place around 4,000 years ago. It's still ongoing today. There are lots of different types of food fraud associated with it. The most recent one is the organic scandal coming out of Sicily, in which conventional produce is being labelled up as organic. Okay, how much food in the UK do you think is associated with some form of fraud? Again, just another quick poll. Okay, so we've got a range of answers. So we've got 1%, 10% or 20%. So report in 2015 showed that around 10% of the food in the UK is associated with some form of fraud. It's quite shocking, that number, in some ways. However, I expect it's probably going to get worse, what with the economic outlook and issues around Brexit. Many retailers now require you to do what's called a VASSP or TASSP, so vulnerability assessment or threat assessment. How can you control what your suppliers do? If you use spices and they come from third world countries, what controls do they have and how can you demonstrate that? In 2015, Bart Spices recalled batches of cumin that had tested positive for almond protein. Professor Hugh Elliott, who investigated the Horsegate scandal, stated in the Independent newspaper that he is highly suspicious that a dreadful cumin harvest in India is causing some producers to substitute or dilute their cumin with peanut or almond shells. Moving on to a little bit about labelling. Hopefully, as food producers, you should be aware of the Food Information for Consumers regulations. These changed the requirements for labelling between 2014 and 2016 quite dramatically, in particular in relation to allergens and nutritions. But in the 2016-17 period, there were 195 recalls in England, Wales and Northern Ireland due to mislabelled allergens alone. Should the person writing the labels also check them? Can you give them to somebody else? How do you actually show that you are doing due diligence? Also, what claims can you legally make? You may have seen recently the brand Ridiculously Rich, which was run by the winner of the 2016 Apprentice TV show, has had to recall a range of products. 7 out of the 8 products made had to be recalled due to incorrect allergen labelling. The company claimed only those sold online were incorrectly labelled. However, the FSA's view was that it does not distinguish between online sales and those through wholesale or retail outlets. It will recall everything. It may sound a lot of gloom and doom, but honestly, it's not all that bad. As long as you do your homework, sort out the maths with various scenarios to see ultimately what the profits will look like, it can be worth it. And remember, help is available from the Chamber of Commerce. Okay, one final poll just before we go to the questions. The Chamber of Commerce is looking at running some future workshops next year relating to food and drink. Just interested in your feedback in terms of what you would be interested to see. Okay, so there is everybody's put all of those down. The top one is coming out as food safety and shelf life, followed by food labelling. So we will take those comments on board and look at what we can do in the new year. Okay, we're going to move on to some of the questions that you've raised. Just give us a minute while we have a look at them.
Well, thank you very much, Malcolm. That was very insightful and very interesting. Potentially a lot of work, but help is at hand, so that's really good news. I have a question here submitted by somebody earlier. A lady couldn't attend the seminar. She's asking, how long will it take to gain certifications? She's a very small business. She doesn't have a lot of time or money, and she wanted to know how much of her time would be taken up in trying to achieve certification.
It's difficult to answer for each individual customer. You will need at least 3 months worth of data before you can go for certification. That's so that when they come to audit you, they've actually got some records to look through and base their decision on. Normally, I would say that it will take between 1 to 3 months to get all the paperwork in place, depending on the size and complexity of your business. So you're looking, I would say, around a sort of 6-month period between making the decision to, yes, we're going to go for it, and actually going for your audit.
Okay, no, that's great. Another question that has come in, it's about supplying to the public sector. Is the process the same if the company is to be supplying to hospitals?
In general, yes, it is. The only specific exclusion would be if you are selling a nutritional-based food product, then, or a product for a particular health benefit, then you would need extra legislation or extra requirements for that product. But if it's just going to be used in the normal hospital canteens, then the normal food safety standards will be sufficient.
Okay, thank you very much. I have a question myself to ask you, Malcolm. This is kind of personal to me. So aside from working at Cumbria Chamber of Commerce, I also run a fairly modest artisan food business. Very modest, as I say, from a very modest little kitchen. If I am thinking of growing my business and move it up a notch to supplying to perhaps a small, local, independent shop, what would I need to do? What would I need to consider before making that decision?
I think you would need to consider quite a few things. I think have a word with the shop first of all. What do they want you to do? What do they need? Is there anything specific that they need you? So do they insist that you have salsa, or will they be happy if you registered with your council and you're approved by the EHO? Are they happy with that? I think the next thing would be to make sure that you've done the sums in terms of you know the profitability of your product and you know what the challenges are. Can you up your production in the same kitchen you're currently using, or will you need to find new premises, for example? Once you've then decided it can be done financially, it is then a question of making sure that you've got as much due diligence defence in place. So this is things like, have you looked at your labelling? Have you checked out, do you need to send samples off for shelf life analysis, for example? Have you got thermometers calibrated? Do you keep temperature records? There's a whole host of different things that will be specific to every business, because ultimately every business is unique.
Thank you very much. That's very useful. Food for thought. Pardon the pun. Right. Thank you very much all for attending today's session. Again, the Cumbria Growth Hub is here to help you, to support you. We have specialist business advisors to help you, with all sorts of advice, from marketing to helping your business, helping you write bids, to helping you with a host of information that Malcolm just mentioned. Malcolm is also one of our food and drink specialist business advisors, so he is on hand to help any of you that need some advice, and also we can advise on any access to any subsidies that are available. So please do get in touch. My details on the screen there. Send me an email, give me a call, and just have a chat. Even if you're not sure, give us a call and we'll have a chat. In the new year, we will be holding, as Malcolm said, some workshops and potentially more seminars and webinars around food and drinks. So we will keep you posted. So for Malcolm and I, thank you very much for attending. Thank you.